So you're deconstructing, reconstructing, and practicing what you saw in the video. So the idea is to move away from just level text all the time. What I used to do is do level text all the time, like I said, and teach main idea, and we'll talk about where that fits. I shifted my practice and I decided to use complex text, not always grade level complex text in small group, because some of my students were like a year or two behind. So what would be complex text for them? I made sure it had a lot of and what I noticed about using complex text versus level text is these language structures that are barriers for students come up almost every paragraph and every page. But with a level text, the complex sentence only comes up once. So if you talk about like a conjunction like but, and how but gives you a contradiction or a contrast to the idea they just told you, and that's what is pushing against them and not helping them understand the text. If you only see that once in a level text, you can't like maneuver it and keep practicing it over and over and over again. What I noticed, and I was very resistant to using complex text in small group, and I wanted to keep like level text and things like that. But what I noticed by doing it with students is the students were really moving. They were like moving considerably compared to before with their achievement in reading. And I think it's because they come across these complex things that they have to make meaning of that you pulled out and talked about, and it comes over again and again and again. Within 3 pages, they have to practice it. So here's I was in 3rd grade working with a group of students, and we were doing a text set, which we'll talk about in a minute. And I decided to work with this small group because they weren't moving as much. They knew the code. I don't want to use a bunch of complex text with kids who don't know a code. So these kids had their phonics and their code pretty well. But they weren't moving because I think there was a lot of like knowledge gap and language processing as around meaning of language structures and learning how to maneuver them and understand how they mean what they mean. So I used this text that was the whole purpose was trying to find out what are the differences between amphibians and reptiles. So what I want you to do is I want you to take a deep dive, and I want you to read. I can read it to you if you can't see it. I want you to think of what sentence you would pull out if you were working with this text with kids. What do you think is going to be a high leverage text that you think students would get stuck on that would allow you to teach some really good meaning around the big ideas of reptiles and amphibians, but also let you teach a language structure that might be complicated and get in the way over and over and over for kids? So think about it for a minute. And I'm going to have a poll where you get to choose. So go ahead and look at this. There are 600 species of newts and salamanders. The second is most amphibians can breathe through their skin, but only if it stays damp. And the last one is most amphibians breathe in water. Second one for 2 reasons. One is we're trying to teach students through these texts the difference between amphibians and reptiles. So that's like a big idea that goes with that purpose. And then the second one, it's an opportunity to really teach a language structure that keeps coming up in text that's a barrier. So you'll see in a minute how I actually worked with a group of students, and we'll get down to structure. But I just want to show one more I'm trying to show you big research things that shift myself out of level text and like big practice ideas, and then I'll show you on the ground what it actually looks like when you're with the small group. The second one is there has been a lot of science of reading. The research has been around for a while, but it's getting a lot of political movement and implications in districts and schools. So it's like it's around more. It's really and basically putting a lot of implications on our practice. But there's some good things about it and some things that are hard. But there's 2 views of the research around the science of reading. The one is the simple view, which you've heard, which is Scarborough, the reading rope. And the one I like better is Nell Duke, because Nell Duke takes into consideration not just the phonics and the code and like the language comprehension. She puts in the whole thing of like readerly life and attitude towards reading and like orchestrating and being able to take all these things and strategies and your executive functioning and putting it all together. That's her green circle. So I think it's important. I'm making a lot of shifts to explicitly teach language and the knowledge gap, but I'm not forgetting the whole readerly life and teaching kids how to put it all together. And I'll show you how it all fits. But the next piece of research that came out of the science of reading was the baseball study, which a lot of you have probably heard about already. But basically, there was a baseball study by Reck and Leslie, and they realized when they did the study that knowledge matters, and there's a lot behind why students are not making meaning of text because the knowledge gap. So in this research, basically, they said if you had a high knowledge of baseball and a high knowledge of reading ability, you were at the top. If you had a high knowledge of reading ability but a low knowledge of baseball, you actually didn't do that well. And if you had a low reading ability but a high level of knowledge, you actually could handle the text. So you can see right here how knowledge actually matters. It's not just skill level. So like if you don't have knowledge and you keep teaching kids stop and think and like stop and jot, you're not going to be really able to take in a lot of the text. So basically, this whole idea came out of the text that we read should not be isolated books where we just read a book here and there. That a part of our work as educators in reading is to really pay attention to the knowledge gap and to make sure that when we're doing small group instruction or whole, that we're really connecting text. We're not just doing one. So how can you get more bang for your buck? How can I read a shark book with kids, but then I read other ocean mammal and we talk about the ecosystem in the ocean. So during small group instruction, I might not just read one shark book, I might read a few, and then we can talk about the pros and cons of sharks in the ocean. So the whole idea that came out of this research was we really need to be doing less level text and maybe just chapter books and really thinking about in small group instruction, how do we do more text sets for kids so we're building knowledge while we're teaching them reading process, and we're doing more complex text to help kids come across the language structures that they really, really need to get to know and know how to maneuver. So knowing that, one big shift I've been doing in small group instruction or small group work is instead of isolated text, I've been trying to put groups of text together for a bigger essential question. So while we're reading, we're not reading just to reiterate strategies and stop and think with a post-it throughout the whole book. We're trying to make meaning and build knowledge so we can like decrease that knowledge gap.